Have you ever seen one of those memes online of local man too angry to die because pure adrenaline just keeps him alive, and you want to do exactly that, and I guess protect the party sometimes? Well, I have a very specific job for that very specific fantasy of yours. Warrior is one of the 4 tanks in Final Fantasy XIV and is very simple. Big axe, big anger, what's not to love? Back in the before times when dinosaurs roamed the earth, also known as A Realm Reborn's launch, Warrior was absolute fucking dog water. However, over time has become an absolute powerhouse of a tank, and that remains true in Dawntrail, with very, very consistent damage and some of the highest self-sustain of any job in the game. Yeah, those memes about the job being a green tank, yeah, there's a little bit of truth to that. Just a little bit. And now I'm here to tell you about it. How the job functions at lower levels, and how it evolves into the melee healer we all know it as today. If you've seen my previous Paladin guide, it's going to be structured very similarly. But in case you haven't, here's the rundown of how this is going to work. Firstly, I'm going to talk about every skill the job has up to level 50. Including roll actions, because tank roll actions are very important. After that, I will talk about every skill the job has in 10 level increments, so like level 60, 70, etc., all the way up to max level, to talk about how the job functions at max level, and any other tips and tricks that I may have to play the job at max level. If you want to see specific level ranges, then there are timestamps in the description for you to jump around however you want. And now, let's get into Ungaing our Bunga. Never saying that again. One of the most important skills for Warrior is obtained at level 10. Defiance is your tank stance, and it effectively means you slap the enemy, and the enemy will clap back at you, which is exactly what you want. I don't think your Dragoon over there is angry enough to keep themselves alive. No, that's you. And so you want those enemies to be targeting you. That's what Defiance is for. In terms of actually dealing damage, Warrior has its basic 1-2-3 combo by level 26 of Heavy Swing into Maim into Storm's Path. However, unlike the other tanks, mainly because the equivalents have been removed over time, Warrior has a second combo finisher at level 50 called Storm's Eye. This transitions us into one of Warrior's most important attributes, its Surging Tempest buff. If this buff is on you, all of your damage is increased by 10%, and that is granted by Storm's Eye, so you want to make sure that this buff is on at all times. This effectively means if your buff is not on, or your buff is about to run out, you will do the Storm's Eye combo. In any other circumstance, you will be doing the Storm's Path combo. You also have your AoE combo of Overpower into Mithril Tempest, which does kind of the same thing. Fun thing to note is that Mithril Tempest you get at level 40 and also gives you the buff, but you don't have it on single target until level 50. Now, I'm not saying you should use Mithril Tempest on single target in that level range to get your buff up. I'm not telling you to do that, but that is exactly what I'm saying, because it's funny. You also gain access to Tomahawk as your ranged attack, which is, there's not really much else to say here. At level 6, you gain a very interesting skill, Berserk. Berserk makes the next 3 weapon skills you land guaranteed critical direct hits. This works on any weapon skill you have, which is your 1-2-3 combo, your Tomahawk, which, if that happens, it's a very awkward skill to use, so yeah. However, you do get some other skills you can use it on, mainly at level 35. You gain the trait The Beast Within, which is your gauge. Well, it's called the Beast Gauge, but it's the same thing. You gain gauge by using Maim, Storm's Path, and Storm's Eye. Important thing to note is that doing your Storm's Path combo in full gives you 30 Beast Gauge, and using Storm's Eye only gives you 20, which is the main reason why you use Storm's Path when you don't have to re-up the buff. Once you have 50 gauge, at level 35 you can use it on Inner Beast, which is just a single target gauge spender. Not really much else to say here. At level 45, you get an AoE version, Steel Cyclone. However, you won't be using this very often, simply because your AoE combo doesn't give you gauge until an unreasonably high level, so don't expect to use Steel Cyclone very much. But at level 50, you do get to use it sometimes because of a new skill, Infuriate. Infuriate's a very simple skill. It's an off global with 2 charges. You press the button, it gives you 50 beast gauge for free. So you get to use Inner Beast or Steel Cyclone for free. Very, very fun. Do keep in mind that you can hold a maximum of 100 gauge, and if you have 60 or more gauge and you use Infuriate, that extra gauge goes to waste. It doesn't overfill until you use it. You just lose it. So make sure when you use Infuriate, you have 50 gauge or less. This will be a very consistent thing across all levels, so keep that in mind early on. In terms of unique defenses, Warrior actually has a couple. First, at level 30, you gain access to Thrill of Battle, which increases your maximum HP by 20% for the duration, and also heals you for the amount increased. So, for a simple example, if you have 10k HP and you use Thrill of Battle, you will temporarily have 12k HP, and it will heal you for 2k. This effectively means that in niche situations you can actually use Thrill of Battle as a little bit of a heal, since it's always just the extra 20% that you gain from max health. So it's a nice little healing option. You don't really have much of that at this level range, but that will change very soon. Believe you me, that will change very soon. At level 38, you gain access to Vengeance, which is a very simple skill. It's like the other tank skills, where you get 30% damage mint for 15 seconds. However, Vengeance has its own unique property. If you get hit by a physical attack in the duration, you actually do an automatic 55 potency retaliation. It's effectively like having Thorns from other games, where you do recoil damage whenever you take damage, which is the only skill in the game but I think does this. I mean, there's probably Blue Mage stuff that I'm forgetting, but in terms of tank stuff, yeah, this is the only one that does that. It's a tiny bit of extra damage, but hey, it goes a long way. At level 42, oh my god. Do I have to talk about this skill? I do. Holmgang! Holmgang is your tank invulnerability skill, and is the best one by far. First of all, it has a 4-minute cooldown, which, to give you some perspective, is almost half that of Paladin's Hallowed Ground. Additionally, the way this one works in particular is that you still take damage, but you cannot be reduced below 1. So you will always hang on with that 1 HP, provided you're getting slapped hard enough. Also, because of its 4-minute cooldown, it gets to be used significantly more often. Here's the best example of I can give with how broken this skill is. In Dragon Song's Reprise Ultimate, you can use this 5 times over the course of a fight. No other tank can come anywhere close to using their invuln that much in a single fight. It just allows you to ignore so much bullshit. It's ridiculously powerful. Though, make sure you have some health before it wears off, because if you're at 1 HP and Holmgang wears off, you're 1 bitch slap away from being sent to the Shadow Realm. And that's everything for Warrior at level 50, but before we move on, we gotta talk about the role actions. First is Rampart. 20% damage mitigation for 20 seconds. It's a very simple skill and is a staple in a tank's loadout for a reason. Use this in dungeons very frequently. At level 12, you get Low Blow, which is a stun. Not the most useful thing, but it does have its use cases in dungeons, like in the Strayborough Deadwalk, for example. Very useful on those stupid fucking dolls. At level 15, you get Provoke, which allows you to put yourself at the top of an enemy's aggro list and gives you a little bit extra. You'll mainly use this for tank swaps and higher end content, or to gain aggro on an enemy in a dungeon that you missed and is currently robbing a DPS blind. At level 18, you get Interject. Have you ever seen these red flashing cast bars? Those are interruptible, so you hit Interject and they can't use that skill anymore. You don't use this very often, but going back to the Dragon Song's Reprise example for a second, there's actually a moment where interject is required, so keep it on hand just in case situations like that come up. At level 22, you get Reprisal, which reduces the damage that every enemy around you deals by 10%. Not just who you're targeting, everything in a circle around you. This makes it, again, very useful in dungeons, because that means every single enemy around you is doing 10% less damage. On top of whatever mitts you may be putting on, you're taking a whole lot less damage than you would have otherwise. This is also used on bosses for raid wides, because making the entire party take less damage from unavoidable damage is something that you want all the time. At level 32, you gain Arm's Length, which has two effects. The first, and more commonly used one, is the knockback prevention. This allows you to just ignore certain knockback mechanics. However, for tanks, the second effect, the 20% slow when you get struck, is a lot more useful for dungeons, because they attack slower, you don't get hit as often. Arm's Length is damage mitigation. Please, for the love of God, use this in dungeons. I beg of you. And finally, at level 28, you gain Shirk. This takes 25% of your current aggro and throws it somewhere else. Hopefully that someone else is a tank. This is also used for tank swaps, where one tank provokes the boss and the other one shirks to them to make sure that there's no aggro shenanigans. Makes things a whole lot simpler and easier. And that's Warrior at level 50. It is a very straightforward job. Then again, pretty much every job in the game is straightforward at level 50. You do have a second combo finisher, which no other tank has, at least not anymore, on top of some pretty decent skills in Berserk, giving you that guaranteed crit directs, Inner Beast being decent single target damage, Thrill of Battle giving you that extra HP, which helps a lot, and Infuriate giving you that free gauge. I'm struggling with things to say. A lot of the stuff when it comes to playing Warrior at this level is similar to other tanks, making sure you use your mitigations well in dungeons, as in not stacking all of them at once, but spacing them out throughout a dungeon, making sure Arm's Length is actually used, please, and in Warrior's unique case, Thrill of Battle is a neat little heal you have just in case. So Warrior seems pretty simple and not super crazy at this level. You have no idea. Oh boy, we are at the fun level range today. However, we start off somewhat small. Just kidding, this skill is ridiculous. At level 54, you gain a trait called Inner Beast Mastery, which upgrades Inner Beast to Fell Cleave. Oh boy. Fell Cleave is one of the most famous warrior skills for a reason. You use this so often, its damage is monstrous compared to the rest of your rotation at this point, and will be used a lot, so get used to pressing Fell Cleave. Level 56, however, is where every single dungeon from here on out becomes your bitch. At level 56, you gain access to Raw Intuition. Raw Intuition doesn't seem that crazy. It's a 10% damage mitigation for a few seconds. Not super crazy. However, you gain health for every enemy you hit. Not just one guy, but every single enemy you hit gives you health back. So, if you hit 10 enemies with an AoE skill, you get 10 heals at the same time. This effectively means that Raw Intuition is a second tank invulnerability on a 25-second cooldown in a dungeon. It is insane how much healing you get from this, because it's a flat potency, not percentage damage like Bloodbath. It is a flat potency. This also works pretty well in single target, but you get a few other tools that help you with that. Speaking of, at level 58 you gain access to Equilibrium, just a free 1200 potency heal on the off global. This is actually more health than a Clemency from Paladin, which is a little insane. The only caveat is that it's only useful on yourself, but that's not really much of a downside because it's just free HP for you. Yippee! And finally, level 60, you gain Steel Cyclone Mastery, which upgrades Steel Cyclone to Decimate, which has a brand new animation and more damage. You'll be using this in AoE still. However, you won't be using it as much because you just don't get gauge from your AoE combo still. What the fuck? And that's Warrior at level 60. That was a very quick section, but there really isn't much to talk about. Cleave does so much damage, Equilibrium is a good self-heal for you, and Raw Intuition makes every dungeon in the game a joke. Self-healing on every enemy hit is just obscene. Like, look at this. Look at this. I just healed my whole health bar, and my healer didn't do anything. So yeah, not much else to say. This is where Warrior gets absolutely fucking broken, but you still get some fun skills later on. And oh yeah, I'm looking at the next level range now, and oh boy. At level 62, you gain access to Onslaught, which is your gap closer. Similar to Paladin, get used to using this for damage and nothing else for the most part. Yeah, that's kind of the unfortunate thing about these two gap closers, is that they're not used for utility most of the time. They can be. Sometimes you'll use them to gap close into a group of enemies in a dungeon to grab them faster, but in terms of regular boss fights, yeah, you can sometimes stockpile it. You don't have a self-damage buff to worry about like Paladin does, so you can use it a little more freely, but yeah, you're going to be using it for damage mostly, so get used to that. At level 64, you gain access to Upheaval, which is just free extra damage every so often. Well, every 30 seconds to be exact. This just gives you more damage. What else is there to say? Not much else. Let's just move on. Level 66 is actually a very important trait for Warrior. Enhanced Infuriate. Every time you use Cleave or Decimate, it lowers the cooldown of Infuriate by 5 seconds. This effectively means you get to use more Cleaves and more Decimates over the course of a fight, because you get to use Infuriate more often. This is a very important skill, and also helps with that Cleave fantasy of yours. This also means that, unlike before, risking overcapping on Infuriates is a lot more common because of the shorter cooldown, so you'll have to keep an eye on it a little bit more often. At level 68, you gain access to Shake It Off, which is an AoE shield for the entire party, and also gives the entire party a regen for some reason. Also, another extra effect this has for some reason is, at base, it gives everyone a 15% HP shield. But if you have Vengeance, Thrill of Battle, and or Raw Intuition on you, it increases the shield's potency by 2% per buff, up to a maximum of a 21% HP shield. You won't be using this super often, but there are some cases where it does come in handy for that little bit of extra damage. Oh boy, at level 70, you gain another one of the most famous warrior skills ever. At level 70, you gain a trait called Berserk Mastery, which upgrades Berserk to Inner Release. Inner Release works similarly to Berserk, where you gain guaranteed direct crits. The difference is that it only works on Cleave and Decimate, and makes those two skills free to use. You don't need gauge for them while Inner Release is up. You just get 3 free Cleaves or 3 that's a tongue twister. 3 free Cleaves or 3 free Decimates. There we go. That was hard. Additionally, it also gives you an extra buff called Inner Strength, which makes you immune to stuns, slows, sleeps, and knockbacks, which is sometimes useful and also sometimes griefing. This is the skill that absolutely makes Warrior's job fantasy, because Cleave is a very, very powerful skill, and getting 3 guaranteed crit directs on that skill in a row is great. Also, another feature I didn't mention until now is that if you have buffs like, say, Dragoon's Battle Litany or Scholar's Chain Stratagem, you gain extra damage on these skills, because even though they're guaranteed crits, they now, ever since 6.2, give you extra crit damage. This also works for something like Bard's Battle Voice, which gives you extra direct hit rate. So, your damage just gets even higher with these skills, on top of the rest of your kit having some extra crit chance. This makes Warrior a very consistent job. Because your burst has almost no RNG to it, this makes Warrior very consistent. Usually, jobs like Paladin or Gunbreaker have to worry about RNG on some of their most powerful skills to get some good damage. Warrior doesn't really have to worry about that too much. It just means that they want Dragoons and Scholars more often, but they can work well with just about anybody. And Warrior is just a very strong job at this point. Lots of damage, lots of self-healing, but trust me, it gets even better as the levels go on. At level 72, you gain a new trait called Nascent Chaos. This makes it so when you use Infuriate, you gain a buff called Nascent Chaos. This briefly upgrades Decimate into Chaotic Cyclone, a guaranteed crit direct AoE, which gives your AoE a lot of extra damage. Also, jumping ahead a little bit, this trait also works at level 80, where Nascent Chaos turns FFXIV into Inner Chaos. A very similar story, a very hard-hitting, guaranteed crit direct single target hit. This makes Infuriate a very important skill because Inner Chaos does even more damage than an Inner Release buffed FFXIV, even at higher levels, so getting as many uses of Inner Chaos under buffs is incredibly important. I'll talk about this a little bit more in the max level section, but trust me, this shit is very important, and Chaotic Cyclone is just very good. One thing I do want to mention now, actually, which is a very interesting quirk of the game and something that is very useful for Warrior. You know how Raw Intuition gives you a flat potency heal for every enemy hit? It also has a chance to crit heal. Well, with Chaotic Cyclone and Inner Chaos being guaranteed crits by themselves, that means that the heal from Raw Intuition is also a guaranteed critical. This doesn't mean too much for AoE because one overpower in a group is basically a full heal anyway, but for single target this gives you a little bit of extra healing with Inner Chaos, which is, it's very good. It gives you even more self-sustain if you use this smartly. At level 74, the Beast is mastered with the trait Mastering the Beast, or as I like to call it, the Beast has been set free, because Mithril Tempest at long last gives you Beast Gauge upon use. This means that you can actually use Decimate outside of using Infuriate, which just gives your AoE a little bit extra. Now instead of just doing Overpower and Mithril Tempest over and over again, you actually get to use Overpower, Mithril Tempest, and then the occasional Decimate when you have the meter for it. This just makes your AoE feel a lot better, and I wish this was at a lower level, but no. Square wants us to suffer. At level 76, you gain a few important things. First is Enhanced Shake It Off. On top of the extra shield, on top of the regen that you get from Shake It Off, it now also gives a flat heal on use. This gives Shake It Off a whole lot of utility, because it does everything. Wait, not even a meme, it does literally everything. Shield, heal, regen. The only thing it doesn't do is reduce damage taken, but like that's kind of what it does with shields anyway, so make of that as you will. At level 76, you also gain access to Nascent Flash, which is your buddy mitt essentially. When you use it, you have to use it on another target first. You gain the buff Nascent Flash, and they get a buff called Nascent Glint. Flash gives you the same self-healing that Raw Intuition gives you every GCD you land gives you a 400 potency heal. Nascent Glint makes it so whatever health you get also is applied to them. So you get to heal 2 people at the same time, yourself and one other guy. Additionally, you also give them a 10% damage mitigation buff with Nascent Glint. This is a fantastic buddy mid option and also a fantastic recovery tool. The only caveat is that it shares a cooldown with Raw Intuition, so you can't do something like Raw Intuition, one guy and then Nascent Flash another at the same time. You have to pick between one and the other, which is honestly a good thing. This means that since Warrior is usually designated as main tank, you're going to be using Raw Intuition more than Nascent Flash. But in the off chance that they decide to off tank, then Nascent Flash does come in handy, because it technically provides more healing than Intervention does on Paladin, though it's not quite as spammable because it's on a hard cooldown. So, checks and balances, you know? Still a very strong skill. And finally, at level 78, you gain a trait called Enhanced Thrill of Battle. Not only do you get the increase to maximum health and the healing from the amount increased, it now has an extra effect where you receive 20% more healing at the same time. This on its own sounds kind of but let me tell you, this is a phenomenal skill, because a lot of shields from Sage and Scholar are percentage based on how much the first part heals for. Let's take Scholar's Adloquium for example. It has a 300 potency heal and puts up a shield which takes 180% of that heal and puts it as shield, effectively taking the heal and multiplying by 1.8. Now, if that initial heal is also higher, that means that the shield you get is also higher. And because they can use Recitation to give you a guaranteed crit shield and deployment tactics to put that shield on everybody else, this gives Warrior a unique position to where Thrill of Battle can now be used to give even bigger shields than you previously could do. While you're not gonna be fishing for this on purpose a lot of the time, when this situation comes up, this gives Scholars some ridiculous shielding power, and it's a whole lot of fun. And Warrior in general is just a very strong tank even without that extra synergy, because guaranteed crit heals from Inner Chaos, Chaotic Cyclone, extra healing that they get from Thrill of Battle, and they have more utility on Shake It Off. And with Nascent Flash, Warrior at 80 is phenomenal, but we've got more stuff to cover because it just keeps getting better. At level 82, all hell breaks loose. You first gain an upgrade to Raw Intuition, which gives you Bloodwetting. Bloodwetting is basically the exact same skill, but with a few extra effects. You now have 2 damage mitt buffs at the same time, which equates to roughly an 18% damage mitigation. Additionally, you also get a 400 potency shield on top of that, and the same healing from before. However, the healing effect is lengthened from 6 seconds to 8 seconds. This means that you can now land 4 GCDs of self-healing on yourself when you use it. A tip for this, by the way, you want to do what's called a late weave for this, especially if you have slower skill speeds. What this means is when you look at your global cooldown as it rolls, once it's about 2/3 of the way done, you can use Bloodwetting. This ensures that you get to use 4 GCDs under it, so you just get to heal more. Also, at level 82, Nascent Flash gets upgraded to have the extra damage mitigation and shield that Bloodwetting gets. So it's an even better buddy mitt tool. At level 84, you gain Melee Mastery, which just gives you some increased potencies, not much to see here. You also gain Enhanced Equilibrium, which also gives Equilibrium a regen on top of the heal, which is a little silly, but it just goes to show just how much they want to make how much they want to make Warrior a self-sufficient tank, and this helps with that. At level 86, you gain Orogeny, which is just an AoE version of Upheaval. Yeah, Upheaval's not an AoE, Orogeny is, and you can only use one of them because they share a cooldown. Because of course. This effectively means that Orogeny is only used in dungeons because its potency is so low that it's not even a gain on 2 targets. So, yeah, you'll just use this for dungeons and nothing else. At level 88, you gain Enhanced Onslaught, making Warrior the only tank that has 3 charges on their gap closer as opposed to just 2. Yeah, Paladin, Dark Knight, and Gunbreaker all only have 2 charges on their gap closer, but Warrior gets a 3rd. This means that you get a little bit of extra damage from this skill, but you also have a little more room to use this for utility if needed. Other than that, yeah, it functions the same, not much else to it. And then finally at level 90, you gain one of the funniest skills in the entire game, Primal Rend, aka the Sonic the Hedgehog spin. Primal Rend is a very unique skill. You get this off of Inner Release, which means that Inner Release now has the Primal Rend Ready buff on top of it. This allows you to use Primal Rend, which is a GCD gap closer, which hits in a circle around the target for 700 potency as a guaranteed crit direct, with harsh falloff, but honestly, who cares? This skill is one of the silliest in the game in my opinion. It allows you to do things that other tanks can't do. It gives Warrior some pseudo range utility, since you can technically use Primal Rend at a distance. It's a gap closer. One thing to note though, do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not use Primal Rend to pull bosses. That is one of the worst uses for Primal Rend you could possibly have. Don't do it. I swear to God. I see too many warriors do it, and it is dumb as fuck. Stop. 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 And that's Warrior at level 90. It feels kind of like a complete package because Primal Rend just gives you that extra oomph. It's almost like a 4th Fell Cleave, except it has AoE attached to it. On top of having one of the most broken skills for dungeons in the entire game, and just a little bit of extra healing on top of it. Oh yeah, by the way, that guaranteed crit heal thing that I mentioned with Inner Chaos and Chaotic Cyclone, yeah, that also applies to Primal Rend as well. So, yeah, you're just invincible in dungeons whenever Bloodwedding's up. And then we have the level 91 to 100 range, which is even better, and just a lot of enhancements. A lot of enhancements. At level 92, you gain Vengeance Mastery, which upgrades Vengeance to Damnation. The 30% mid is upped to 40, and the Thorns damage is still there. However, you now gain a new effect where, when you get hit, you gain a new buff called Primeval Impulse, which gives you a regen for 15 seconds. This is a very potent regen because it's actually twice the amount of equilibrium and is the same potency as what you receive from Bloodwedding. While it's not as ridiculous as Gunbreaker or Paladin for actually mitting damage, it is really good for that self-sustain, which was already really good on this job, but it just keeps getting better. At level 94, you gain Melee Mastery 2, which just gives you some extra potencies, not a really big deal. It does give you more Fell Cleave damage, that's always a plus. You also gain Enhanced Rampart, which adds an extra effect where you receive 15% more healing. Now, this part's hilarious. While every other tank gets this and helps a lot, remember what I mentioned about Thrill of Battle earlier? That stacks with Rampart, so Warrior has the best synergy with Scholars because of just how fucking massive shields can get. Again, you're not going to be purposely fishing for this a whole lot of the time, but if that situation comes up, oh boy, your party is not dying, that's for sure. It is one of the most hilarious synergies in the entire game. At level 96, you gain Enhanced Inner Release. Every time you use Fell Cleave or Decimate, you gain a stack of a new buff called Burgeoning Fury. Once you gain 3 stacks, you're then able to use a new skill, Primal Wrath. Primal Wrath replaces Inner Release on your hotbar and is just an extra off global for 700 potency. This just gives your Inner Release window even more extra damage. And 700 potency is a lot. It's also an AoE and also has pretty harsh damage fall off, but it still feels good to land. One thing to note is that this is also not a guaranteed crit direct, so there is a little bit of RNG in your burst phase finally. At long last, randomness, my favorite. At level 98 you gain enhanced reprisal, which makes reprisal last 15 seconds up from 10. This is really useful because in dungeons, every single enemy around you hits you for less damage for longer. And for raids, a lot of bosses have lots of repeated damage, and this just covers that damage a lot longer, which is very nice. Your healers love it, your party loves it, everyone loves it. And finally, at level 100, you gain a new trait, Enhanced Primal Rend. This gives Primal Rend a follow-up in Primal Ruination. This skill is beefy. Just look at this animation and listen to these sound effects. Jesus Christ. It also hits for a pretty chunky amount of damage, is a guaranteed direct crit, and unlike Primal Rend, it's not a gap closer, so you have free reign to move around while using it. And man, does this do damage. A whole lot of damage. Yeah, that's really it. I don't really have much to say aside from now let's talk about how everything comes together at level 100. In terms of Warrior's standard opener, it works like this. When you pull the boss, you'll use Tomahawk and then use Infuriate immediately to make sure that it's on cooldown and you have Inner Chaos ready. You'll use your Storm's Eye combo, and then you will weave in Inner Release and your potion. Do be careful with the potion though, because it can sometimes be a little fucky. Afterwards, you'll use Inner Chaos, Primal Rend, Primal Ruination, and then 3 Fell Cleaves. Use Primal Wrath and Infuriate, then use another Inner Chaos. Afterwards, to make sure you get as much bang for your buck in your potion, you'll do a Storm's Path combo, a Fell Cleave, which will give you one more use of Infuriate, and then finally an Inner Chaos at the end, which just gives you a whole lot of damage under your potion. One thing to note is that if you are running a faster skill speed, like 2.45 or something, you can move the potion to be after Maim instead, and it'll still hit everything. One thing to note about Warrior compared to Paladin, which I didn't mention in that guide, is that skill speed is a lot more based on your preference more than anything else. Typically, if you want to Omni-Tank, you'll usually run a 2.5 second GCD. However, Warrior can kind of do whatever it wants. You can run either 2.45 or 2.4. In terms of how Warrior works after this, there's a few things you have to keep in mind. First of all, make sure your Surging Tempest buff is up at all times. If your buff is at, say, 10 seconds left, you might want to start working on your Storm's Eye combo. Additionally, in terms of your gauge management, unless you're about to go into a burst, you typically want to have 50 or less. Because if you need to use Infuriate, you don't want to overcap and waste gauge. You want to make sure that you get the full value of Infuriate at all times. So make sure your gauge is below 50 or at 50 at all times. If you're going into a burst phase and Infuriate isn't super close to being capped, you can then get more and just hold on to it and use even more Fell Cleaves under party buffs. Just make sure that Infuriate isn't at risk of overcapping. Rule of thumb, if Infuriate is at like 20 to 25 seconds ready to go on one stack and you're about to use Inner Release, you might want to consider using that Infuriate stack. However, if you're at 70 gauge or something already, you're gonna be at risk of overcapping, so be careful. Aside from that, you'll want to use Inner Release and your Upheaval on cooldown. Use onslaughts as you get them and maybe stockpile them either for movement or for 2-minute buffs, because the extra damage does add up over the course of a fight. And honestly, in terms of warrior specific optimization, there really isn't too much in comparison to Paladin. There is no ranged equivalent. You do have Primal Rend as a quote-unquote ranged option, but it's really just following these priorities and not overcapping on gauge, and you'll do just fine. In terms of defense, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Warrior, at least according to the entire Final Fantasy XIV community, is considered the de facto main tank. So if you're taking this job into endgame content, you will be the one that will be pulling the boss every single time. This means that you're going to have to get used to boss positioning, because that's pretty important in these Savage fights so far. You're going to want to also make good use of your mitigation buttons to keep yourself alive. Bloodwetting is a fantastic skill to keep yourself alive because of the self-healing it has. So you want to remember to late weave bloodwetting every time you use it. But make sure you're saving it for a tank buster in case that does come up. Equilibrium is also a fantastic skill to just give you a gigantic boost in health. It also can crit, so you'll sometimes just restore a third of your health out of nowhere. It's great. Thrill of Battle is also mainly used in tank busters to give yourself that extra damage, and for multi-hit busters you just get more healing from the healer, which makes it even easier for them to keep you alive. Damnation is great for tank busters because you'll get hit by autos afterwards, and that regen helps keep you alive even longer. In case you haven't heard yet, Warrior's really good at keeping itself alive. I gassed up Paladin in how it can keep itself alive, but Warrior kind of does that a little more on demand, because Bloodwetting is a 25-second cooldown, Equilibrium is 60, and you have a bunch of extra options to help that as well. However, just because you have so much healing, this does not mean you are invincible. Poor timings, or just getting hit too much, will result in your untimely demise. So you will still want to do mechanics properly, and you will want to use proper cooldown timings. How that will actually work depends on the fight, so there will be a little bit of on-the-fly figuring things out, knowing when tank busters come up and when you can freely use bloodwetting for long auto phases without shooting yourself in the foot because oops, tank busters coming up. In terms of how to usually deal with tank busters, Damnation is usually your best bet because, well, it's your highest damage limit option. It also will usually be paired with bloodwetting, though bloodwetting will typically be used on every tank buster you can, with some exceptions, but yeah, these two skills, and probably a Thrill of Battle on top of it as well, will usually cover just about everything. Do keep in mind that your actual mid numbers aren't as high as the other tanks, so you will sometimes just take a crap ton of damage even if you do your mids properly. Don't panic, because Bloodwetting and Damnation will help regen you back to full, and you have Equilibrium to help with that as well. Also, one other thing is that Holmgang allows you to ignore a lot, just a lot. So if you have options to use Holmgang to ignore tank busters, usually people are going to take it. Do keep in mind that a lot of these tank busters will leave you at 1 HP, so you will need to heal yourself afterwards, especially if you don't have a white mage which uses Benediction frame 1. So make sure Bloodwetting and Equilibrium are at the helm for that. And honestly, that's actually it. This guide was probably a lot shorter than my last one because Warrior's just a lot more straightforward of a job. Despite the fact that there's a lot of optimization you can do with your gauge, it's still a very simple job at the end of the day. It's not super punishing, it's very easy to pick up and play, and if it's your first tank, Warrior is the safest bet to learn how the role works. You can use this as a stepping stone to learn Paladin, or Gunbreaker, or Dark Knight, or you can stick around with it because even though it's probably the best tank for beginners, it's still a very solid option for experts as well. On top of that, if you want a job to just take into dungeons and be unkillable, this is the pick. And yeah, that'll do it for the guide. Thank you for watching. I'll likely do some guides on other jobs that I like. I'm currently eyeing up Machinist to want to make a guide on that. That job is just way too much fun. Yeah, that about does it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!